The story for Aliens Colonial Marines takes place sometime after the end of the second film, Aliens, and decides to pretty much completely skip over Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, and of course the Alien vs. Predator films, which, to be honest, those don't really count anyway. But with that being said, let's actually talk about the story of this game, because in this game you actually follow a Colonial Marine named Winters, as he and a few other Colonial Marines are checking out the USS Sulaco, the ship from the second film, and of course responding to that distress beacon that the other Colonial Marines from the second film sent out. And let's just say a bunch of xenomorphs start to kill a bunch of Colonial Marines like they always do. And let's also say the whaling company is there, and you know how evil and sinister those guys are, and they're always trying to stop you and stuff. And also, let's just say you crash land on a little planet called LV-426, and let's also just say you have to survive. That's pretty much what the story is, and if I explain too much, it might be considered a spoiler. So I'm not going to explain too much. This is to say you play as a Colonial Marine, and you have to kick some bug ass. Now, the story for Aliens Colonial Marines, sadly, isn't the greatest out there. Definitely not. I mean, you don't really care for any of the main characters. They're not even close to as memorable as the Colonial Marines from the second film. There's no memorable dialogue. The writing here isn't all that great, and the only reason why I would say the story here is decent is because you get to visit some of the great locations from Alien and Aliens. You get to visit LV-426. You get to visit the place where the Marines from the second film held up and tried to survive against the alien horde, and it's really cool to visit all these places. The thing is, I'll talk about this in graphics, they don't look all that great, but it's still really cool to visit those places, and that's the only reason why I would say the story here is decent. But now let's talk about the sound, which I like to start off by talking about the voice acting. And the voice acting here is nothing special. It really isn't. I mean, everybody does a decent job. The writing itself isn't that great, but everybody does an okay job. One thing I like is that they got some of the older performers from other Alien films to reprise their roles as their characters in this game, but really, besides that, there's nothing really special about the voice acting at all. Now, one thing I really liked about the sound is the sound design itself, because it does sound like an Aliens movie, or in this case a game, because you have the motion sensor, it goes bloop bloop bloop. That's really cool. It really adds to the game, which is kind of weird to say. You also have the pulse rifle, you have all the other guns. They all sound very unique, very Aliens. The atmosphere, the aliens, the way they sound, everything just sounds like an Aliens game or a movie, and it really does work for the game. And to be brief, the soundtrack here is nothing special, and for the most part you barely hear it in the game. So overall, I think the sound here is really good only because of the sound design itself. And now let's talk about the graphics. Oh boy. Now, like I said, you get to visit some of the classic settings of Aliens, or even Alien with LV-426. Now, the thing is, it's modeled so terribly, textured so poorly, and it just does not look good. It really does not. All the facial animations are really wonky. All the animations for the aliens are almost laughably bad. The texturing is just so muddy and so blurry, and sometimes they don't even load until you get right up close to them, which is just terrible to look at. The environments are foggy and just unpleasant to look at, and this really blows my mind, because when I saw this game last year, it looked great, and here it looks poor as all hell. Now, the only thing I could say that looks decent about the game is the lighting. I think the lighting is pretty decent in the game, but besides that, everything else looks dated as all hell. It just does not look great at all, and very buggy too. Let me just say that it's very buggy. It really is. But now let's talk about the gameplay, which Aliens Colonial Marines it just is destined to be a fun game, because you can play as a Colonial Marine shooting a bunch of bugs in the campaign. You could bring in a friend and shoot a bunch of bugs together. It should be great, and it's Gearbox Softwares, the guys that made Borderlands and Brothers in Arms. How could it be bad? Well, the campaign here is garbage because of two reasons. One, the AI is ridiculously dumb and just laughably bad. The aliens just don't feel like aliens. They feel like dumb cats just roaming around everywhere. It's just extremely retarded. And two, you have human enemies in this game. Human enemies. And I'm not talking about Dead Space 3 where, you have a couple of human enemies here and there. Very, very light amount of human enemies. No. There's sometimes where it's complete levels where you're just fighting human enemies, and it feels so garbage when you're shooting them, because the gunplay itself isn't that great, but you can actually kind of forgive it when you're fighting aliens, because while their AI is extremely dumb, it's still kind of fun to shoot an alien. When you're shooting enemies and they're hiding behind cover and you're hiding behind cover, I'm just thinking to myself, am I playing an Aliens game? What? I didn't know I was playing Call of Duty. This is just terrible, I was thinking to myself. And while it is fun to bring in a friend for co-op, it's still just terrible when it gets into those moments. When it's like fighting aliens, it's still, you know, not that great, but it's fun because you're shooting aliens and you kind of feel like a Colonial Marine. When you're fighting enemies that are human, it's horrible. Now, a couple things I would say about the campaign that I kind of liked. One, there's an upgrade system, which is actually kind of fun because you can upgrade your character and, of course, acquire different things to put on your guns. Like, you can put scopes on your guns and, like, different magazine types, which is kind of cool. And also, I will admit there's a couple of moments in the campaign where I was like, this is actually kind of cool. There's a whole stealth moment in the game where you actually stealth around some of these aliens, which might sound terrible, but it actually really works here. So yeah, there's a couple moments like that that are actually kind of fun, but for the most part, the campaign's a huge disappointment. Now, besides the campaign, you also get a competitive multiplayer mode where you can actually play as an alien or a Colonial Marine, and for the most part, that's actually a lot of fun, because if you're playing a Marine, sure, the gunplay itself is still very, generic, doesn't feel that great, but one thing I really like is that the aliens are actually played by people with a freaking brain, so the AI is not playing as them, and it actually feels like an aliens game. You actually feel like you're buddying up with a bunch of Marines, fighting off a bunch of aliens before you get murdered, and it actually feels like an actual freaking game at that point, and I really like the multiplayer here. I mean, sure, it's not great. It still isn't great. The gunplay isn't amazing, and there is some bugs and some technical glitches in the actual multiplayer, and of course the actual graphics get lowered down in the multiplayer, but you know what, I still found it to be extremely fun. Also, I thought the aliens themselves, when you actually get to play as them, they're extremely fun. Except one thing, the controls are good, but there's sometimes where they start freaking out for absolutely no reason, and I have no idea what I'm doing. But besides that, they definitely control much easier than Aliens vs. Predator from a couple years ago. So while I enjoyed the multiplayer, I really just did not like pretty much everything else in this game. The campaign is just disappointingly bad with horrible AI. The story itself is forgettable. The sound is good only because of the sound design, and the graphics are dated as all hell. So I am extremely disappointed to say that overall, this game as a package is not very good. Game over, man. Game over. Thank you and goodbye.
Are you seeing this?